Good afternoon, venerables, colleagues, Dharma friends, people online. My name is Roy Snedden. I am from the University of Adelaide. I'd like to thank you for inviting me on this cold Canberra day to present my PhD thesis, which is titled Exploring Gender Equity Issues Experienced by Theravada Buddhist Nuns in Australia. My supervisors are Dr. Tiziana Teresi from the University of Adelaide and Dr. Nadine Levy from the Nan Tien Institute. So, a quick introduction to the project. How does a crusty old Scotsman end up studying Buddhist nuns? If I'm at a party and I introduce myself and that I'm doing a PhD thesis, they'll ask, well, what's your topic? And I'll say, I'm studying Australian Buddhist nuns. And the first question I get asked, always, is, oh, do Buddhists have nuns? Do Buddhists have nuns? So, if nothing else, this highlights that there's a need for some visibility here. The second question I'll get asked inevitably is, oh, are you a Buddhist? Well, yes, I've identified as a Buddhist for the past 20 years. I'm one of those Buddhists, a Western guy who's found an English language Buddhist book in a Japanese hotel room, desperate for something to read, and I haven't stopped reading since. Much of my progress and practice is online. I do listen to Dharma talks, I participate in online Sutta study classes, I enjoy my meditation. And by and large, you could say I am perhaps an internet Buddhist. I don't have a huge amount of interaction with the Sangha. So how did this all start? What was the seed of the idea? Well, it goes back to Adelaide, 2018, and we had a Pindapata procession down Rundle Mall, which is in Adelaide CBD. All the temples get invited. So we've got nuns and monks there from the different temples. And this was my very first one, so I was super excited. And particularly seeing as we had a senior nun, a bhikkhuni, a Terry from the United States coming over, I was really, really keen to meet with her and to actually see how this whole thing works. So I rock up to Rundle Mall. And I knew I was in the right place. There are all these little clusters of groups of very well-dressed people, mostly holding Tupperware containers. And this was really important because I had no idea what I was doing. I was there with my bag of apples, and I wanted to watch these people and do what they did. And that was the idea. And here comes the procession. You can see the monks, and the first thing I noticed, lots of different colored robes because they're from different temples, but I couldn't see the nuns. And I'm there, where's the nuns? And wait, there they are. They're at the back of the line, a bit of a distance behind the monks. And I thought, well, hang on, what's going on here? So once again, being relatively new to this, I sneak up and have a quick chat to the nun. Say, nun, Aya, what's going on? And she says, no, I'll tell you later, not now. And I thought, okie dokie. So I'm watching to see what's going on. And look, people are very happily going up, and they're putting their food into the bowls of the monks, and doing the anjali, and it was all kind of really quite special. But when the nuns got to the end of the line, some of these people turned their backs. They were shunning the nuns. And I had no idea what was going on here. I said, hey, Aya, what's going on? She said, no, I'll tell you later. It's just not now. Now, I was outraged at this. I thought, this is not on. And I was not the only person. You can see a lot of people, Buddhists and non-Buddhists, are looking at this behavior saying, what is this? This is not a good look. And that stuck in my mind for some time. Now, as I was heading towards retirement, I decided to do a PhD, and I was speaking to my supervisors, and they said, well, what are you thinking of doing? And I told them this story, and they thought this would be a great research topic. Now, the last question people would ask me, well, why just Theravada Bhikkhunis? Now, I would dearly love to interview all of the monastics, but that is just outside of the size and scope of a PhD. We've got to keep the project nice and tight, and knowing that there are Theravadan Bhikkhunis here in Australia, that the ordination is happening, and that there has been some contention over that, I thought this would be a good way to keep this project into something that's very meaningful and very doable. So we've decided to do a PhD. The first thing we do is a literature search. That's where we go onto the academic databases and we see what the existing research is. So I type in Australian Buddhist Bhikkhunis and or nuns, and nothing comes back. And I thought, there's just nothing there. So once again, this visibility problem, it's fairly dominant here. So I thought, okay, well, I'll have a look at just Australian Buddhists and see if there's any research there. Well, actually, there is. There's quite a bit of Australian research. They're talking about monks. They're talking about the history of Buddhism. They're talking about the migrant experience. They're talking about the fractured Buddhist communities that we have here, but not a heck of a lot in there on Bhikkhunis. So I said, okay, let's see if there's anything out there on Buddhist nuns. I'll take the word Australian out of the search, and bang, there's a lot of research there on Bhikkhunis, on the gender issues, and the debates that have all been going around Bhikkhuni ordinations. There's a lot of stuff out there. Now, I must shout out to Professor Anna Halifoff from Deakin. She's done some excellent research. I'm not the only person in Australia looking at Buddhism. Her Buddhist Life Stories of Australia is an excellent video series and does include some Bhikkhunis, and I would very much recommend that. The other part of the literature search that I should mention is that this is how we developed the research questions. What are we actually going to ask the monastics? And so if there's not a lot out there already on Australian Buddhist nuns, we thought, well, we'll present the themes from the literature and say to the Australian monastics, well, what do you think of this? What's your opinion? And that's kind of where the project developed from. Now, we did consult a senior bhikkhu and a senior bhikkhuni at the very early stages of the project to make sure that the questions that we were asking were relevant, and we do recognize that this is a potentially sensitive area, so we wanted to make sure that the academic work that we were doing was going to be of use to the Sangha. So we've done this literature search. We've been reading all of these papers, some 300 plus papers. And from that, you can find that there's three general types of paper, three general types of academic work. Now, the first kind of theme that you'd have would be the Buddhist works. This is where they start talking about the Bhikkhuni ordination, the Vinaya debates, the arguments about lineage and validity, the pros and the cons, the different types of monastic rules, the Garudhamma, and how repressive or not that they may be, the traditional structures, particularly in traditionally Buddhist countries, which do tend to be quite patriarchal, and is this a Buddhist thing or is this a cultural thing? So this is the kind of first group of papers, and we'll be asking questions about our monastics, what they thought of those. The second group of papers tend to have a feminist focus. There's the Western feminist papers, and the early papers of that, while they had some interesting perspectives and some very good points, tended towards things like, don't worry, our little brown sisters, we're coming to rescue you. So then there's another group of papers that then came back to debate that and said, well, hang on, that's Orientalist, don't you tell us what to do, and so forth. There's papers around the political activism, and a lot of the academic work from the lay academics tends to be superficial. They'll look at things like saying, well, nuns have 311 precepts and monks have 227, so that's misogynistic. Oh, nuns have the Garadama, the monks don't. Oh, this is terrible. But the big problem is that a lot of these academics didn't actually go out and ask the Bhikkhunis what they thought. So there's some pretty ivory tower stuff happening here. In terms of the feminist perspective, because there's two camps, you've got the conservative traditional Buddhists who are kind of like anti-Bhikkhuni ordination, and then you've got the progressive Buddhists that are pro-Bhikkhuni ordination. When you get some of this feminist argument, it gives ammunition to the conservatives, and we saw this at the Hamburg conference, where they can point to this and say, well, oh, see, this is all these Western feminists that are leading this Bhikkhuni revival. And paraphrasing again, they're saying, well, we like our nuns nice and quiet. So there's a lot of debate happening out there, and what we wanted to do is kind of like filter some of that and find out what is happening here in Australia and what the thoughts of our Australian monastics are. So there's a lot of noise happening there. The third group of papers, incredibly useful. These are the scattered papers that do some field work, that actually go out and actually see what's going on and talk to the monastics, whether it's going to be the Thai nuns in Thailand, or the Sri Lankan nuns in Sri Lanka, or the Bhutanese nuns in Bhutan. And this is an important point, is a lot of these papers may or may not be specifically looking at Theravadan Buddhism. Some of them look at different traditions. But the themes that they're coming up with tend to sort of cross the different traditions and can be kind of like rhyming with what's happening here. And so that's what we wanted to have a look at in those papers. So time to do some field work. Let's go talk to some nuns. So look, you can see from just some of the photos of the places that we've visited. We did visit Western Australia, South Australia. We've been across to New South Wales, down to Victoria, and it's just been fantastic. It has been absolute joy, and we have been welcomed wherever we go. Now, important to note that not everybody wanted to be interviewed. That's okay. That's okay. The main reason for the field work was to go out and tell people about the study and answer any questions that they had. And we had a lot of questions. What's the study about? What sort of things are you finding? Not just from the monastics, but the lay people. We had some fantastic meetings with the lay people, and everybody's got an opinion. Everybody knows what's going on. They're highly aware of the situations. The nuns, when the lay people engage with them, are absolutely adored. But the purpose of the field work was to actually visit people in their natural habitat. And a lot of the interviews that we did were before and after the field work via Zoom. So far, we've interviewed 12 nuns, 6 monks, 4 lay people. The call for lay people wasn't, hey, lay people, come and have a chat. It was pretty targeted that way, where a monk or a nun would say to us, look, hang on, here's someone that's got a bit of a story that's really worthwhile for the study, and we think you should be put in touch with them. We've concentrated on Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, largely because my wife wouldn't like me around on the bike any further than that. The important part of this is once we did the interviews, we had a full transcription, and we gave these like word for words back to the participants so that they could have a look at them and say, no, Roy, you got this part wrong, or that didn't come out quite the way I wanted to say it, or I forgot to say such and such. Because one of the things that's so important about this study is that we're going to have the full transcriptions with consent as appendices to the thesis, and they will be published. So this is not just some other white guy explaining what women think. The original text is going to be there. And the front part where I get to have my point of view is going to be there, but the original text of the voices
of the participants, particularly the nuns, is going to be there. And we're going to be lodging that in a national archive so that that's there for future research, future generations. Because we're talking about visibility. One of the things I want to start doing with this project is get a little bit of visibility out there. So what were the responses? We said there's three main groups. We had things about structure, we had bits about feminism, and bits about what's going on in here in Australia. Now, on the ordination, the rules and the structures, the big thing that happened from the interviews, well, Bhikkhuni ordination is happening, it's here, it's continuing to happen. We had one just last month, and it's growing. So no matter what's being said in the international literature here in Australia, this is a thing. There do remain pockets of opposition. There are still Buddhist groups and monasteries that are saying don't support these nuns and don't support the monks that support them. A lot of that actually came out from the talking to people outside of the interview, where we're actually sort of talking with lay people, chewing on some barbecue after a Pindapata or a Dana session, say, hey guys, what's going on? So, oh, I've heard such and such. So it's there. There are definitely pockets of opposition. There is a very big difference in the monastic and the academic perceptions. A lot of the monastics will say, oh, well, nuns have 311 vows, and of course the monks only have 227. That's misogyny, absolute misogyny. And they've never spoken to a monk or a nun to sort of say what's going on. And you say, well, okay, well, what's the difference? And you say, well, a monk doesn't have to have a breastcloth when they're breathing. They don't have, women's issues. You say, okay, this all makes sense. And a lot of the academics, not all, but a lot of the academics haven't taken that into consideration at all. A lot of the academics think that that the confession is where, a la the Catholic system, where you're actually bowing down before a monk and confessing. And of course, I'm saying to the monks, well, that's what's happening. And the nuns are saying, no, it doesn't actually work like that. So I'd like to set some of that record straight when I'm actually publishing this, that a lot of the papers that are out there are very ivory tower, and they're not really talking to the people where it counts. One of the big things that came back is that the rules and the tools, the Vinaya, the Gaudama, are part of daily practice and are highly valued by the participants, because the academic paper says these are oppressive, repressive. You say to the nuns, well, okay, what do you think? And they say, no, this is part of our life. This is important to us. On a complete side note, one of the other things that came up from the interviews is the importance of information technology here in Australia. We've got such vast distances, and particularly in some of the minor hermitages that I thought I was an internet Buddhist. I mean, seriously. So many of the people are really dependent on communicating, not just within their own communities and their own sanghas and performing their avadas, but with people internationally as well. And what we're seeing is that a lot more interaction with people from different traditions as well. So you've got monks and nuns from different schools are meeting online and discussing the Dharma and discussing the suttas. And there's lay people in there as well. And I've been sitting on some sutta classes, which have just been fabulous for my own practice. In response to feminism, Western feminism, the question says that the text says that the Bhikkhuni revival is a Western feminist initiative. How do you think? And everyone laughs. I mean, seriously, I have had every single person has just laughed and said, oh yes, 2,600 years ago, a man in India decided he was going to be a Western feminist. No, it's nonsense, absolute nonsense. But by the same token, every participant I've spoken to, highly educated, very, very aware of feminism. They've all said, look, feminism's a good thing. It's just not what's important to me right now in my practice. And that was a real, to me, I'm thinking, hey, that makes sense. It does, because there is a scholar, Rita Schussler-Fiorenza, who basically started saying that, hey, you feminists, you have to realize that people who enter religion have a different endpoint from me. And that was really obvious here. One of the things that came out, the participants are not politically active, but they are politically aware. I mean, it's not as if they're cloistered away and have no idea what's happening out in the world. They're very, very aware of the politically active groups. They're very, very aware of things like the Alliance of Bhikkhunis and of Sakyahita and so forth. But they do have a real priority on their own practice, which is fair enough. In responses to the day-to-day issues, look, I was expecting, I came in with a bit of a prejudice seeing the shunning, and I was expecting, like, what are the differences between monks and nuns? And almost universally, the response came back that monks get to live with other monks who have got 10, 20, 30, 40 vasas. They've got this level of experience, this gravitas. The word gravitas came up so many times. This is something that the nuns aren't experiencing because, well, we've only had nuns here since, Bhikkhunis here since, 2009. I mean, they're still teenagers. And the word bootstrapping came up a lot because they're developing their Sangha. They're building it from scratch. And so what are some of the differences between monks and nuns? A lot of the nuns are having to do things, mundane things that junior monks wouldn't be expected to do. Oh, hi, you've been ordained last week. That's great. Can you become an abbess? Or can you become a spiritual director? Or can you go run this retreat? And a junior monk wouldn't have that level of expectation put on them. Opportunities to travel did come up. I mean, we've got the 3 big Theravadan monasteries here, only 3, and not a heck of a lot overseas that nuns can move around to. In terms of barriers, one of the questions we asked is, well, what do you see the barriers? From the international literature, accommodation is one of the big ones, and that was raised here as well. Visas were raised. And also the issue of aged care was a bit of a worry of what people are thinking about, because, and I can absolutely associate this because I'm getting old. But it was a problem here in Australia with the monastics as to how we're going to be managing this. And that's something I think the ASA can seriously sink their teeth into. Yeah, the other thing is that city-based nuns have a very, very different experience from the forest nuns. All of the nuns that I interviewed have expressed how grateful they are and how wonderfully provisioned they are with the daily necessities, the food, the medicine, roof over their head. But certainly the city-based nuns have got a very different experience to the Bhikkhunis out in the woods. This was a really interesting part. We were talking about multiculturalism because so many of the other studies, it's Thai nuns in Thailand or Sri Lankan nuns in Sri Lanka, and here we have a very, very fractured Buddhist community, and that was mentioned here earlier. So I was a bit worried about what the response would be regarding multiculturalism. So I was actually asking a lot of the participants about this. And it came up again and again and again in the most positive and beautiful light that our multicultural communities here, one of their biggest fears is that their kids will leave Buddhism. That they'll grow up in Australia and think this is something from mum and dad's home country that hasn't got a lot of relevance to us. And so for the longevity of Buddhism here in Australia, they are absolutely delighted to see some form of Sangha that is representative of what their kids' life is like here in Australia. And that includes people of different color, people of different gender, gender equality. And that's something the kids are going to say, because otherwise, and this is what's happening in some of the research from overseas, is that the kids will start moving towards non-monastic Buddhism. They'll go for the insight meditation centers and general mindfulness. And hey, I've got all respect for that. But this was something that was raised by the participants, and also in just the general chit chat, that this was a wonderful opportunity for Australian Buddhism for the new migrants, kids, and mixed generations. And I thought that was a really important thing that came up. East versus West was very, very different from what I was expecting, having read the international literature. And a large part of it came to the lay expectations. What are the lay expectations from a Western-raised layperson, Anglo-Celtic, European, Australian, someone that's not from a traditionally Buddhist country, to someone that comes in from a Buddhist country or has grown up from that? And a large part of it is people from the traditional cultural Buddhists tend to express themselves. They wanted a cultural experience, whereas people from a Western Buddhist new to Buddhism wanted a personal experience. And when you translate that into the situation for the Bhikkhunis, particularly if you're in the city-based areas, there's this additional burden where, as a Westerner, I want my Dharma classes, and I want my meditation schedule, and I want my retreats. I've got to have my retreats. And when are you going to give all of these to me? Because that's part of your job as a nun. So I wasn't expecting that, and that was a real bit of an eye-opener there. I also found out that non-Buddhist Australians, just talking to people, they just said, well, okay, well, you're walking down the street, you're wearing your robes, what do people think? And overwhelmingly, they said, no, non-Buddhist Australians are actually really, really accepting of us. And that Buddhism as a religion has a really good reputation, probably more so than some of the other religions. And so it's a lot easier for a non-Buddhist Australian to accept people in robes. Most people are lay supportive. I'm starting to go on in time. So study progress. Look, there are still a few spots. So if there is anyone here, or if there's someone that you think might want to participate, my contact details are readily available. We're going in for a spot shortly, and I'll have some brochures to hand out with all our contact details. So if you're interested, love to hear from you. I'd love to hear from all of you, because this is so much fun. It really is. If you do want to participate, you can have an interview, or you can provide a written response. You can be named, you can be pseudonymized. If you want to be totally anonymized, we can arrange that too. What are we doing with this? We're putting it into academic journals. There's one journal article written already, so it's not totally invisible now. You do a Google search for Australian Bhikkhunis, I'll be there. It will probably end up into a book. We want to get this thesis into a book, preferably with all of the transcripts out there as well, so libraries can have more access into it. And as I mentioned previously, we want to put the thesis into a national archive, because the National Health and Medical Research Council that guards all of research ethics has identified this as a culturally significant group. So we'd like to get that thesis in there. So preliminary findings, going back to that first slide. Yes, there really are Australian Bhikkhunis. They're there, wonderful people. And generally speaking, they've all reckoned that Australia is a really fertile ground for a real fourfold Sangha. And that's me. Thank you so much for listening.
There'll be a breakout session shortly, but is there one or two questions for Roy to finish this session?
Just a comment, not a question.
Microphone.
Thank you. in the early first half of 20th centuries, there were very, very few Bhikshuni in Vietnam, even of course Mahayana, except Lamagupta version of Vinaya from beginning of the history, which is around first and second, third, fourth century onward. But throughout the whole history of 18th century or so, there were very few, very limited recorded for any or many Bhikshuni on activity, except very substantial, important person like a princess, no queen, but some certain princess become nun and then been recorded by historian. We don't know whether anyone had doing another PhD thesis on that issue, researching how Bhikshuni had been look like in China and Vietnam throughout 20th century up to late 20th century. When I became a novice in my province, the second crowded Sangha community in the whole country of 44 provinces in the South Vietnam, I believe that there was only just 60 years ago, around 5, 6 small non-temple. All right, which is not more than 20, including the very senior one and so on. But suddenly, the change in regime is another big story we don't want to mention here. But say 20 years after 75 incident, I like to name as incident, the restriction losing, and then our senior Sangha start to do their best to translate it, all the Vinaya book of 5 different lineages from Chinese characters into the Vietnamese version. And suddenly the society changed in many ways, and then led to a situation of where, by the point of 1975, among 40,000 Sangha in the South Vietnam, I guess there were somewhere around maximum 5,000 Bhikshuni. But now, 2023, I got the estimation that among 60 or so thousand Sangha of all tradition, okay, we now got all 3 traditions booming up, and 60% of those figures are Bhikshuni, or nuns at least. You see, I'm not sure why it's so much so in at least in number growing up in the last 30 or 40 years. Then that's a bit wonderful, because they were not something can be imagined by anyone, say 50 or 60 years ago. And that's just a bit of information for you. We were very supportive for, of course, the 4-4 assembly, but not only just it happened by itself. It has to be from the good mind and the effort of senior Bhikkhu Sangha to provide some training college, some convenient environment where the woman can join their master into different nunnery, and they become good teacher themselves in the 20 years after that, and so on. And then the number just keep multiply in the last 30, 40 years, and that's the good news. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment, Venerable. I really take on board particularly the early parts where you said we're looking at history, but there's no written history there. And when you start looking at the academic research that's being done now, there are a lot of people looking at that question: is why is there no history? Or, there are some of the papers that are saying, well, that's because the history was written by the men. So that's outside of my field, but you pick up a lot of that as you're doing the initial research. And I just hope that my little project will help contribute to that written history.
Thanks, Roy. I'd like to thank you for the presentation and ask Nicholas to come up to give the last presentation of the day. Thank you. Thanks, Roy.
Thank you.